So this is our panel this afternoon, and we're going to be taking you through some parts of Headliners, but also going to be speaking to wider issues, conversations around accessibility and inclusivity in the Australian music scene. Let's start with Headliners though. So Elly-May, throughout the show we hear about this wild idea that you had, something that you thought, I'm going to take a risk on this. Where did that seed begin? Where did this all start for you?
How long do you have?
I know, literally. Maybe just the initial idea of wanting to put together these two bands. Where does that start for you?
Well, I mean, it started when I was very little because you never saw people like you up on the main stage as a person living with a disability performing. And my dad created a space for me on his stage, which was a really special experience to grow up with. And as soon as I was given the opportunity to then create a platform for other artists living with disability, I knew that we were missing out on so much talent and I had to jump at it. So.
And what was it about this format that excited you?
I mean, we love a challenge, 7 weeks to get two bands of complete strangers from all different walks of life, all different ages, everything. It was wild. I love a challenge. And I think that was the perfect environment for everyone to just have no time to be anything but authentic.
Also, the possibilities of what can happen when you are in accessible music spaces, as you have toured with your dad previously. Can you talk us through a little bit more of that?
Well, I think for me, even growing up and touring with Dad, at first I didn't really think about accessibility. I just forced my way up there, forced my way through the show like I saw him or everyone else do. And I never really thought to be like, hey, I'm struggling with these stairs or struggling with this. But obviously it got to a point where my family would notice, or eventually I did speak up about it. And then the difference that it made, having that support and the ability to just get on the stage without having to struggle, just meant you could put on a better show.
Paul, you've worn many hats, both as a performer, as a speaker. Have you ever had to decline a gig or not been able to do something because the access just wasn't there?
It's a really good question. From my perspective, no. There's been instances where there have been steps or there've been physical barriers to me participating, and I've basically said, if you want me to perform, you've got to make it accessible. And I do that because I feel like if I'm good enough to perform, then the venue should be good enough for me to be able to perform. And if I compromise on that, then it's not going to change. It'll be slow to change attitudes, and ultimately it'll be slow to change the supportive infrastructure that goes around that. It's just that balance, because you don't want to miss out on gigs, but you also don't want to compromise on your dignity, on your integrity and on your values. And from my perspective, that's really important to uphold, because if you give in to one, then ultimately you give in to other things, and that's a downhill spiral.
You've driven landmark accessibility initiatives here in New South Wales. There's one in particular that I'm thinking of, but what are some of those achievements for you that stick out when it comes to greater accessibility?
Definitely being part of putting elevators on the Sydney Harbour Bridge was a big awesome outcome for me personally, and to kind of be able to drive that from a government perspective. And I always say to any venue, if you can put lifts on the Sydney Harbour Bridge, you can put a bloody ramp on your stage. So that's kind of been my man on the moon. And sometimes people always look at things from an accessibility perspective purely from a disability lens. But I always say, when something's accessible for someone like myself, it's accessible for everyone. And we've got to always remember that disability is 1 in 5, but that doesn't include 65 plus, parents with prams, people with a temporary injury or illness. And so it's a massive cohort. And so we should always be promoting accessibility inclusion as best practice, because it benefits everyone at some point in time. There's also the intersectionality of disability. It can go across any cohort. And it's something you may not have a disability today, but you can have a disability tomorrow, and that's really important to think about as well.
Ria, you've been quite vocal and an advocate for universities to have greater access. When we are talking about those high-density spaces, What are some tips you would give to live performance venues when it comes to accessibility? Kind of looking at what you've spoken about when it comes to university spaces.
I came into the music world thinking that I was the problem because I require access. And if I could solve my problem, then, problem solved. I realized after advocating for access in universities, in the music world for quite a number of years now, that this is not a problem that I created. It's a problem that the world created because especially, stages, there are places where mostly what you see are the most able, but, that perception is now changing. We are creating stages for people who have disabilities, who have different kinds of abilities. And in my own recent experience, we are reimagining how musicians should be on stage and how we should lay out the stage, and also how we need to accommodate and support those musicians with disability behind the stage.
Andy, can you speak specifically to how Creative Australia is working to support better accessibility for live music venues and opportunities for musicians with disability?
Sure. I mean, it's just last week the federal government and Creative Australia, the federal government through the Office for the Arts and Creative Australia launched the Arts and Disability Associated Plan. And this is a framework, it's an investment of about $8 million over the next 4 years to be distributed through the Office for the Arts, through Creative Australia and through Screen Australia to address issues of accessibility. But one of the key planks of that is that I think it's about a $1.2 million investment for live music venues and festivals to be able to increase accessibility and provide some investment to them to be able to help them address some of these issues that are being discussed here. So that's it's a significant investment, but it's probably not enough to solve all of the problems. But I think it's a start, and I think it's about trying to look at leading practice that we've been talking about just a few moments ago in terms of helping venues understand what those needs are and actually talking to people and artists with disability to understand what those access issues are.
There's a great scene where there's a bit of a difference of opinion among one of the bands about a creative decision, and MC Wheels even says, I've typically only really associated or come into contact with or hung around people who have physical disabilities. It's my first time kind of experience people with neurodiverse disabilities,
So we were all learning every day, I think, about each other, about all different disabilities, which is, part of this journey. And I think that every single person that worked on this show had this big, massive growth arc, and we all learned a lot more than I think we thought we would going into it, because it was being so diverse. We knew it would be a challenge for some people, or that some people would have never encountered some of the other disabilities before. But there was just this beautiful sense of community, and we all just wanted everything to be great. And we all knew that what we were doing could be impactful beyond just a great show. This can have a ripple effect and really make some change.
Totally. And even just within that one clip, that one band, this one show, 5 different stories. Paul, what kind of attitudinal barriers does the industry need to overcome for us to start to see that greater representation of musicians with disability and that diversity that you mentioned earlier?
If you look at the Paralympics just as a model, for 10 days every 4 years, every physical barrier is removed so every athlete can compete at their best. For 10 days, every attitudinal barrier doesn't exist and the world is in awe of what can be achieved. For 10 days of the year, every communication barrier is removed and everyone can communicate, interact and thrive collectively with dignity, with equity. And for those 10 days, the disability world blows everyone the fuck away. It's amazing what the Paralympics have done and do. And from my perspective, it is possible. If we can do it for 10 days, if we can do it for one day, we can do it for every other day of the year and remove those barriers and allow people with disability to showcase their skills and capabilities in school, in the workplace, in community, in entertainment, in every facet of their life. And it ultimately becomes unremarkable. It doesn't become inspirational porn, and it just becomes mainstream, just like everyone else. That is my dream, and that's what I hope this show can showcase at a micro level.